question?
No, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, if you can just keep your phone muted while working through the discussion, I appreciate it. Okay. So we're here today. This session is about doing the work. And the topics that we're going to cover today in this session are assess and manage risks and execute the project to deliver business value. So as reference for you, the assess and manage risks are part of EcoTask 2.3, and executing the project with the urgency required to deliver business value are part of the EcoTasks 2.1, 2.6, and 2.9. So with determining and assessing risks, we have a couple of things that we need to do here. And the first thing is that we want to determine what is going to be our risk management approach. And then, according to PMBOK, we need to iteratively identify, assess, and prioritize our risks and our risk responses. And in order to prioritize them, I think we also have to determine our risk response, and then should the risk occur, we'll have to implement the risk response. Okay, we have some deliverables here that come out of this section when you're managing a project. And so some of the deliverables that you need to create will be a risk management plan, a risk register. You'll also create a risk response plan, and if necessary, you'll implement a risk response plan. Some of the tools that you can use to create these deliverables include organizational process assets. You'll have meetings. You'll rely on your team's expert judgment. There's some risk analysis techniques that you can use. There's a risk register that you're going to update. And you'll also do some risk probability and impact assessment. And then throughout the life cycle, you're going to monitor and manage your risks for the project. So what is a risk? According to PMBOK, it is an uncertain event or condition that, if it occurs, has a positive or negative effect on one or more project objectives. So this is an important definition to know. Obviously, it's highlighted in a pretty color and it's starred, so remember it. And then the other one is a trigger condition. And this could be an event or a situation that indicates that a risk is about to occur. So just as an example, I'm going to give you something that has happened to me in the past as far as a risk goes. So my role in my past life of career is I managed a small custom developed application for our AT&T tax team, and they have a group of folks that perform what we call transaction tax compliance for the company. And what that means is that any of those pesky taxes, fees, and surcharges that you see on your bill, be it either a telephone bill, a mobility wireless bill, an internet bill, not so many on the internet side, but definitely on the phone side. Those taxes have to be collected from all of our customers, and we use data out of our billing systems to do that. So when we're thinking about risks to projects that we're implementing, one of the risks that we always consider is the location for where our tax compliance team sits, because it is in places where you can have really terrible weather, like hurricanes and such. So one time, we were getting ready to do a release of software to this custom application, and we couldn't do any testing because nobody was in the office because the office had to shut down for a hurricane. So that's an example of an uncertain event or condition that did occur, and it had a negative effect on one of our project objectives. And the trigger condition would be that warnings were everywhere in their state, and right around the timeline when we need them to do testing and be available to the project team, they couldn't do it because they had to go prepare for the hurricane and shut the office down. So you get the idea of what a risk is and a trigger condition. That's probably highly unusual in a lot of people's areas of the world, but, I mean, not in the world, but in your daily life. But for me, that was a reality, as we always had that risk. So it was always something that was, like, carried over from project to project because it happened and nobody ever wanted it to happen again and not have a plan for it. Anyways, primary components include a measure of probability that the risk event will occur, and the impact of the risk occurring on a project. Positive risks are really risks that produce a positive project outcome, and sometimes they're also referred to as opportunities. Negative risks are those that have a negative impact on the project, and they're also referred to as threats. Okay, another important definition is your risk management plan. And a component of the project, program, or portfolio management plan that describes how risk management activities will be structured and performed. And in the risk management plan, you talk about your risk strategy, you talk about methodology, you talk about who has the roles and responsibilities for identifying the risk responses and also identifying the roles and the responsibilities of who's going to execute them. You also have funding built into your risk management plan. We'll talk about that in more depth. And then timing of how you're going to, when and what will happen when you need to review your risk management plan. Somebody just sent a chat in the chat that they can't hear me. It's a little fuzzy, so I'm going to do something different. Hold on. Is this better for people to hear me? Okay, thank you.
Yes, much better.
Okay. Then risk categories are also a part of your plan. This is, talking about different types of risks and how we classify them. Then also we talk about stakeholder risk appetite. This is very interesting because a lot of times you'll have a customer or stakeholder who says, oh, that's never going to happen, okay? Don't believe them. Honestly, if you think it might happen and you can find anything that shows that it could happen, I would strongly recommend that you include that in your plan and talk about it. Definition of risk probability and impact is also part of the plan, so everybody understands, what's the measures that you're using to identify the probability the risk can occur and what the impact will be. And then sometimes people want to include a probability and impact matrix, which just pretty much is, a picture showing you what that is, and we can talk about that in a minute. There's also some reporting formats and other tracking documents that are included in the risk management plan. Okay, so how do we identify a risk? Well, some good ideas are to talk to people who have done, like in my case, I do a lot of software development, so my projects are all related to that. So if you've done software development in your world before, or you haven't and you're new and you want to get some ideas, talk to other development teams that might have done a similar project to what you're doing and ask them for some ideas. As a team, you could also gather data by doing some brainstorming. You can have a checklist that is analyzed. You can interview others in the business who might have some exposure to any types of risks that have happened in the past. Also, your team will do some data analysis to determine a root cause with a cause and effect diagram. You can do assumption and constraint analysis, SWOT analysis, document analysis, and we'll talk about all of these. As the project manager, you'll facilitate these risk identification by, you know, putting a list out there and getting people to start thinking about it, and you know, keep pushing them to give you some feedback on it. Prompting a prompt list is also another technique that you can use to identify risks where, like I said, you can go out there, and I believe that we have some in our project management network resources that you can look at. And then you can always conduct risk workshops in meetings to do this exercise. Okay, so according to the PMBOK, how you do project risk management. The definition is that the project management knowledge area that includes the process or the processes of conducting risk management planning, identification, analysis, response planning, response implementation, and monitoring risk on a project. It's a lot of words in there, but basically what they're saying is that all these processes combined to make up the definition of what is project risk management. You know, again, I can't emphasize enough about doing a little bit of planning for this. Some people, like I said, I've had customers who never wanted to do it, and then things started to become evident. Oh, this might happen or that might happen, and, you know, you're getting closer and closer to some deliverable that or milestone that you want to meet on time and within the budget, and this is going to derail it. So although that's not the most ideal time to be doing your risk management, you better start. That's all I'll say. Okay. But yes, if you can do it earlier on in your the life cycle of project management, the better off you'll be. But that is also something that you're not always allowed to do, so especially in our environment. But I'm not saying that you shouldn't make an effort to try. You should. Okay, so in risk classification, there's a couple of different ways that PMBOK looks at it. You can classify the risks as effect-based. So analyzing major risks that could be inherent to your project and what's their effect upon the time, the cost, the quality, and the scope. And so in my example earlier about the tax team and when they have to be part of our release and they can't be there because of a hurricane, that is a major risk that we always have inherent to our projects. And so, you know, again, we've built something in under that effect-based risk classification so that we make sure that we do not impact our time and our quality, because those are the two keys that are mostly affected by what happens if their office is not able to be there. And especially, you know, we could even take it one step further and talk about the whole pandemic and how that threw everybody for a loop, and that was never anybody's idea of a major risk until early last year, but obviously it should be on everybody's list now, right? So another thing to look at from a risk perspective is also what are you know, classifying risks as a source base. So trying to think about the terms of where the risk is going to occur. And you can figure this out by looking at, you know, sources that are internal to your project, like your resources. Do you have any resources that are constrained, like incredibly so that they're going to mess up your critical path or something to meeting a milestone? Or they could be, I'm sorry, does somebody have a question? If not, could you put yourself on mute, please? Okay. Then like external to the project. In my world, again, we have tax projects, and sometimes we have legislation. We consider that external to the project. So when the states make a law and they say that we have to collect this type of tax, or we have to change the rate because the government decided to change the rate from 50 cents to $2 or whatever it is. Those things are all external to the project. And somebody is asking me to put this in slideshow form. Not sure if I'm going to do this right, but I will try. Cancel. No, I don't want that.
Kathy, all you have to do is you go to the bottom. And
down here?
Where it says no, yeah, to do the right one. One more to the right.
Okay.
There you go.
Thank you. Is that better?
I'm muting everybody. Yeah. I'm muting people one by one because not everybody's muting and I hear noise. So.
Okay. I think Dan Denslow needs to be muted. I hear feedback from that line. Thank you. Okay. So external to the project, so like I said, for us in the tax team, one is the legislation. Technical, so if there's like a new type of architecture being used to develop the system or enhance the system or whatever, and it's something that's never been done before in our group, that could be considered a technical source of a risk. You can think about them also in non-technical terms. So let's say it's something new the business wants to do. They've never done it before. They want to automate it or something like that. But it's not proven that it can be automated, let's say. So that might be the example of a non-technical risk. And then there could be industry-specific risks. In software development, I'm not really sure what we would say about that because I think of like the telecom industry as the industry specific. So in that sense, if every telecommunications carrier is, coming together to say we're going to fight, I don't know what is something that's practical? They don't want any more taxes being put on internet, right? So they're going to all come together to try to stop that, and then that risk may turn into an opportunity, really, for us if that ever happened. But it could also be, something that causes us to do something different because all these government agencies that are ruling bodies of the telecommunications world might change their mind on something. And then there's always, the classification of generic source risks, and those could just be dumped in a category of something that's not a high impact or high probability, I would say. Okay, so then we also have different types of risks. In the business risks, these are things that would obviously only happen in the business or inherent in the business. They could create a potential for loss or profit. And one of the examples that is given here is purchasing inventory without any guaranteed sales. So we buy all this inventory and then we can't sell the product, which I don't think has happened in a really long time. We don't do that here. Insurable risks. Those are things where the only potential for the risk is a loss, and there's no potential for profit, and insurance may be the risk response because that will be purchased to offset losses. And in the purchasing example, a loss of inventory due to fire, we could make that risk go away, so to speak, if we insured our inventory. Okay, so other things that can happen that are considered types of business risk would be competitive, where there's so much competition in the marketplace and a rival company is developing a superior product to ours. There could be legislative risks, which, like I said, are new laws or changes in regulations governing your products, goods, or services that require you, your company, to spend more time to maintain compliance. Your business risks could be monetary because you have an increase in prices for raw materials, an increase in taxes, an increase in operating costs, and an increase in losses due to non-payment by customers. Actually, all those things are happening right now due to the pandemic. So there's been a lot of that going on. And then operational business risks could be fraud, theft, employee injury, workplace accidents, or damage to equipment. Okay. Is all this making sense to everybody? Am I going too fast, or should I slow down or anything? I've heard this so many times, sometimes I talk too fast. Okay.
No, you're fine.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so another couple of definitions here we have to pay attention to from PMBOK. Risk tolerance. So this is about the amount of risk and the potential impact of that risk occurring. And the tolerance is acceptable to the project manager or the key stakeholder. So in my opinion, I've never been the one to say, as a project manager, that what the risk tolerance is. I'll give recommendations, but usually it's the key stakeholders who get to decide, at least in all of my experience here. The risk appetite is a definition of the degree of uncertainty an organization or individual is willing to accept in anticipation of a reward. So let's say that because I work a lot with the tax team, I have a lot of examples from them. If there's a type of tax that we're supposed to be implementing, or there's some rule about how those taxes should be calculated, and this is a real live example, this is happening right now. In the state of Florida, they want all building systems that do something called rounding to either round up to the nearest whole dollar if it's above 50 cents, or to round down if the nearest whole dollar is, below 49 cents and below. So it costs in one of our billers $150,000 to fix, to make that methodology work in Florida. Also, in the state of Florida, the customers that we bill that are impacted by this law are like about, maybe we bill like $10,000 worth of taxes a year, okay? Now, if you think about that rate of return, we have to spend $150,000, and we've only got $10,000 a year coming back in, quote, reward. Well, what is our risk appetite in the tax team to meet and do that project? I mean, do we have a really high priority because we know, oh my gosh, that's just huge, and we don't anticipate making back our money for 15 years or something? Or are we, is our appetite such that, okay, well, we feel like, we have other ways to mitigate this problem, and what we're doing in the billing system, well, it might not be exactly that kind of rounding methodology. It's pretty fairly close, and it's only going to cause us to be off a few cents. So maybe we won't do it this year. Maybe we'll wait until we have, a better year of funding, and then we'll ask for that money so we can fix it. And I'm not going to tell you the answer to what the decision is, but I'm just trying to give you an example of what is something that's considered risk appetite. What is it that our organization is willing to do to accept, to anticipate getting a payback on that. Then the other definition or term that we need to know about is risk threshold. So this is about the level of risk exposure above which risks are addressed and below which risks may be accepted. So in my world, risk exposure, as defined in the tax department, is if something is going to cost the tax team over $100,000 a year, I have to tell somebody. If my risk is below $100,000, I should tell somebody, but it's not something that they're going to make a big deal about. So, there's this thing between $0 and $100,000 where the department is pretty well okay with accepting a level of risk. But as soon as I think that exposure is going to be greater than $100,000, I have to put it on everybody's report, and everybody needs to know. So that's kind of like, a definition of a risk threshold. My threshold in that case is $100,000. Okay, so let's move on. Guidelines for identifying, assessing, and prioritizing risks. The key word here is iteratively. So you want to do this multiple times, honestly, and even if it's just you looking at it over and over again once it's been documented, I would still suggest that you do it. And then if at some point in time, you're looking at it like, let's say you have this whole risk plan session done with your key project stakeholders, and then you understood what to expect from them, and they know what you're going to tell them, and when you hit that risk threshold or whatever it is that they've set for you. So when you do that, you should get in the habit as a project manager to do that over and over again throughout the life cycle. So you might want to do it, later on when you're in your requirements phase. You'll do it again in your development phase. If any issues come up during development especially, you want to talk about those and look at that list of risks that you created and what your plans are to fix them. And then during your testing, obviously, you want to do it again because you want to make sure that there's no special circumstances like they have listed here that might happen in your project. And a lot of times things hopefully get fleshed out during testing, which is why that's an important phase of your project, especially in software development. And then also consulting relevant historical information, such as risk response plans and final reports from previous similar projects that may include lessons learned, which describe problems and how they were resolved. And then once the risks have been identified and you've categorized them and so forth, then all of this becomes your risk register, if you will. And you can just think of that as like an Excel spreadsheet that says, one column says, okay, here's the risk, here's the description, here's what we're going to do if it happens. And then you might have a little tab that just says, we'll mitigate this risk by doing something, or we will accept the risk, or, a response is do nothing. So that can be, on your little list as well. But, you just need to know and think it through. That's pretty much the whole bottom line of what PMBOK wants you to do. Okay. So there are a couple different types of risk analysis. In the qualitative risk analysis, the technique used to determine the probability of occurrence and the impact of each identified risk. So two key things here is that you have to determine the risk exposure by multiplying the probability and the impact. And they have some very good tools for you to do that we're going to talk about. Okay, so this matrix, can you guys see that okay? I hope you can. Probability and impact matrix. This is a grid for mapping the probability of occurrence of each risk and its impact on project objectives if that risk occurs. So let's just start right here in the center. So in the center here, you have like what I call the very balance of, risks. Like, below this line, it could be a threat, it could be a negative impact, and this way to the right of the line, it could be an opportunity, it could be a positive impact. So according to the y-axis here is the probabilities that it's going to occur, and then the x-axis is telling you whether or not it's going to be a negative impact to the project or a positive impact. And by assigning some numbers and weights to these, then you can start to look at it and put it in better perspective for you as to whether or not you have something to worry about. Then there's also something called quantitative risk analysis. And this is a technique that's used to assess the risk exposure events to overall project objectives and determine the confidence levels of achieving the project objectives. So things that you have to remember here is that a quantitative risk analysis can help you to identify time and cost contingencies of a project. And also, it will help you in refining and enhancing the prioritization and scoring of your risks. So what does that really mean? So when you're trying to form some risk responses, if you're doing a quantitative analysis, you're trying to look at, okay, how could this happen, and is this something that is going to affect not delivering something, let's say. Whereas a qualitative analysis gives you some very specific numbers to look at. So that's kind of like how you can look at them in two different ways. Qualitative, you can add numbers to measure and create that pretty little probability and impact assessment or matrix. And in a qualitative analysis, in a quantitative analysis, you're looking at, how's this going to affect one of my objectives? Is it going to make it not be delivered, or am I going to not deliver what the customer wants, or am I going to deliver something that is going to take twice as long to do or something because of that risk? So that's kind of the difference between those two. Now, for risk responses, they very much recommend that you plan your risk responses, and that consists of developing options, selecting strategies, and agreeing on actions to address overall risk exposure, as well as to treat individual project risks. The risks are addressed by priority, and resources and activities can be added to the budget, schedule, and project management plan to support the risks. Each risk is assigned a risk response, which is an action to address that risk, and a person that will implement that action. And again, just remember that doing nothing is an action, okay? That is a valid risk response. Not always the preferred one, but sometimes you don't have a choice. There are various risk response strategies to choose from to determine a risk response for each risk, and you can create a fallback plan that could be developed in case your primary strategy is not effective. Secondary risks should also be reviewed. These are risks that could occur as a result of implementing a risk response. So honestly, I've had a couple of things that we've had to do from a fallback plan perspective. In software development, a lot of times the fallback plan is you go into the release, you've tested everything, the user said it's good, you go to put it into production, and then it doesn't work. And something happened and the customer's not being billed properly for whatever the taxes are. So your fallback plan is typically back it all out, because something that you had thought your primary strategy was to test. You got user acceptance, and they tested it all and said it's approved. You can put it in, and then you put it in, and it doesn't work the way they thought it would. So you know, having a fallback plan in that case would be the backing it out of the system, the production system, and taking it back and analyzing what happened. Okay, so some of the risk strategies out there we have are like what they consider negative ones would be that you have to escalate. You have to avoid doing something. You have to transfer the negative risk to somebody else. That's a strategy, not probably preferred for the person who gets it, but it is one. You'll mitigate the negative risk, or you'll just accept it, and like a lot of times I've seen it where they accept the negative risk and then it happened and everybody's in a fire drill. Some examples where it can be a positive risk strategy, same thing. You have to escalate because you want to make everybody aware of what's going on, and you know that what you're escalating isn't a bad thing. It's just making sure that people understand here's an opportunity to do something good, and so you want to make sure everybody knows about it. You're having a positive outcome from your risk, and so you want to exploit that and turn it into an opportunity to show everybody that it happened. And that's, you know, in certain circumstances, that's a very positive thing for, you know, when that occurs. You can enhance, oh, that's a good one. Somebody just said in the chat, you end up with a 6-month development lead time instead of a 12-month development lead time. That's always a good one. You know, you can share the risk with others because that makes it less impactful to everybody. And again, accepting risks can also be a positive strategy. It's not a very probable thing that it's going to happen, and it's not very impactful. So in that case, accepting the risk is a suitable strategy. Okay, now contingency plans. According to PMBOK, a contingency plan is a risk response strategy developed in advance. Ding, 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 developed in advance. When you see that, that's kind of key. Before things go wrong. It is meant to be used if and when identified risks become a reality. So in a contingency plan, I've seen where some people actually put in a small bucket of money in their budget. So this will allow a project manager to react quickly and appropriately to any risk event, mitigating its negative impact or increasing its potential benefits. And it also may include a fallback plan for risks with high impact. So a contingency plan, like I said, from a funding perspective, is when you're planning your project and you're, you know, planning the costs, that you might add, I don't know what the percentage would be, 10% of your overall cost for the project, just in case any negative impacts occur. And you want to make sure that you can throw money at it, you know, in the form of, you know, added resources or paying for some, like I can only think of this in a construction environment where, let's say, you know, you're building a house and somebody forgot to buy 5 permits or something, or register for 5 permits at the state or the township or wherever you are. You know, having that money to go get those and get that taken care of will be very helpful. And then it also could include a fallback plan for risks with high impact. And in the case of software development in our company where, you know, billing is a big deal and we want to get the bill right because it gives us credibility with the customer, if something didn't get tested and it shows up in production on day 1 after the release and it's causing a lot of calls into customer care, fallback plan is definitely the thing. Your fallback plan in this case being revert back to the old code and, you know, go back to the drawing board and figure out what went wrong. Okay, so here's some other guidelines to determine and implement risk responses. Again, examine each identified risk to determine its causes and how it may affect the project objectives. And then, you know, spend some time brainstorming possible strategies for each risk, or, you know, also you could look at some other similar projects for historical lessons learned to see what they did. Choose a response strategy that is most likely to be effective for each of the identified risks. If you are unable to bring a risks rating below the organization's risk threshold, ask your sponsor for help. And I think that's a really good guideline. Sometimes we get customers who are sponsors of our projects who are very far removed from the daily goings-on of your project, but yet they can see the bigger picture. So it's sometimes helpful to go back to them and say, hey, you know, this risk is over your threshold of $100,000. What do you want me to do? And put it back on them. Identify backup strategies for risks with high risk factor scores. So high risk for probability it's going to happen, and it is a high impact to the business. Another guideline, determine the amount of contingency reserves necessary to deal with accepted risks, and also determine how much of a contingency reserve you should set aside for unknown risks. You can consult the risk management plan for the description of the content and format of the risk response plan. And you should incorporate the risk response plan into your overall project plan so the strategies can be implemented and monitored. And that's good advice too. Okay, so I have a question for you all, because the presentations that we're teaching this session are a little bit different than what I've done in the past, and I see that there's an activity here for you all to do on assessing and managing risks. Is there something in your workbook that you're supposed to be doing this activity for? And do you have activities in the other sessions that you've been in?
We have not done an activity on the group session as far as the class is concerned. They tell us to do those with our individual mentors.
Okay. All right. So I'm just going to remind you that there is one. And because like I said, I don't see anything in what I'm presenting that gives me any more detail to that. So I just want to point that out to you all, that there's something you should take a look at. Okay, how is everybody doing? Because that was the first topic of our two topics we're going to talk about today. Did you have any questions about all this? I know I kind of feel like I ran through it sort of fast, but if you guys are good, I'll keep on going to the next topic. All right, I'm going to take silence as we move on. Okay, so our next topic is about executing the project to deliver business value. And here, some of the enablers that we're going to discuss. Assess opportunities to deliver value incrementally. Examine the business value throughout the project. Support the team to subdivide tasks to find the minimum viable product, or MVP. I don't know how many of you in what you do on a daily basis hear about the MVP, but what I do, it's like on a daily basis. Everybody's trying to find the minimal viable product that can be delivered to carry the business forward for whatever we're trying to deliver in the marketplace. Also, measure ongoing progress based on methodology, and collect and analyze data to make informed project decisions. And the respective topics and chapters are listed in parentheses on all of these if you need to reference them. Okay, so really no specific deliverables coming out of this other than the success of your project. I don't know why that's not listed as a deliverable because I really feel like it should be, but I didn't write this material. Okay, so one of the things that you need to be doing during your project management life cycle is creating a culture of urgency. And I feel like this is a really important topic because you have to ingrain a sense of urgency in the project environment and the culture. And so that means making sure that everybody from the sponsor to the stakeholders to the development team and people who are, in the fringes of your project all understand the urgency of your project. For me, the reason why I find this to be so important is because, number one, funding gets cut on a regular basis. And if your project's in the middle of development and they're looking to cut funds, your project might be on the chopping block. So all this work that you've been doing up until, this point in time could just get stopped because you don't have any funding to finish it. I've seen it happen in this company, and this isn't like something PMBOK can really teach you, but I'm just going to give you some examples of times where this occurs. In my world, again, I'm implementing taxes on the bill for the customer, and there's a tax that we need to put in because it's going effective according to the legislation on January 1st, 2022, and we have to be able to collect this amount. And if we don't collect this amount, it's still incumbent upon the company to pay the tax. And they're allowed to go get it from the customer, but if we don't get it from the customer, we still have to pay it. So then it becomes basically an expense for the company, and that's not good because obviously all this leads to is, increased cost, operating costs, and nobody wants that hitting the bottom line. So from my perspective, I tell everybody how important my tax projects are. I tell the people that are going to give me the funding. I tell the people that are going to be like on the IT side who are like the lead project manager, the technical solutions manager, the architect, everybody. Hey, this project's got to get done by January 1st, 2022. If we don't collect this money, we're going to be on the hook for it, and you don't want that to happen because it's going to affect your bonus. And usually that's a pretty good sense of urgency to keep everybody going. And I'm not really telling a story. I'm really honestly just trying to break it down into a very simple sentence that says how it's going to affect them. And so probably you can figure out ways in whatever you're doing to create something that is considered urgency so that people will pay attention to your project. And hopefully you never have to stress it more than once or twice, but you should, have it in your back pocket because you might have to pull it out. There was a day when even that projects that had a legal mandate were put on hold like in October because the company needed to just stop spending cash everywhere. They just had to stop. And so for the last 2 months of the year, they weren't going to let any developers do any work or anything because they had to have that money in the bank. So, at that point, I have all kinds of issues, right? I have a risk that was unknown. I have not prepared for it. I have no mitigation for it. So I have a lot of things to do. So I'm just saying that, whatever it is that you think could not happen, honestly, I've seen it happen. And so therefore you have to be prepared to address it if it does. But you can avoid a lot of it if, you keep everybody moving on your project and you have something that makes them understand why it's so important that they finish it as fast as possible. And of course, there's other examples like, we got to be number one in the marketplace, so we have to be the first ones out the door with the product. That is always a very big one too. So I would say that everybody needs to understand what it is and why it's important so that they can, you know, account for what their part is in it. And you as the PM have to be the one that does that. You get everybody involved this way so that they can be committed and accountable for realizing that vision. You can bring in the voice of the customer so that they can express their desires and personalize the value. You also can promote the culture in the project team, you know, monitoring their daily actions, responsiveness, and attentiveness. Okay, so what is business value? This is the net quantifiable benefit derived from a business endeavor. And the benefit can be considered tangible, intangible, or both. So an example of a tangible benefit is, you know, it's going to make us money. It's, you know, going to bring us in a lot of money. It's also a goodwill thing for people out there in the marketplace because nobody else has this product or service. And so, well, you know, that goes a long way in making people's lives easier if, you know, you can sell that intangible benefit as well. So how do you determine what the business value is? Determining it requires examination, evaluation, and confirmation. And throughout a project, there's a variety of means for determining what is of value that can be used. So like I said, it can be financial. We're going to bring in revenues. It can be improvements that are going to shorten the time it takes us to do something. It will bring us new customers. It brings us the first in the marketplace. It could be a social business value that, you know, everybody out there socially values this item. Or it can be a technological value, like, you know, it automates a process so you don't have to do it in 10 hours. It's done in 30 seconds. Okay, something else that you need to understand and be aware of when you're executing your project is the product roadmap. And a product roadmap serves as a high-level visual summary of the product or products of the project. And roadmaps can be things that vary in appearance and presentation. Objective is to display the strategy and direction of the product being built and value that will be delivered. Roadmaps start with the overarching vision of the product. Hey, Pam, can you mute your phone, please? We can hear the dog barking. Thank you. Over time, the roadmap is progressively elaborated as more information is known. Work is being completed or not completed, and the vision is refined. Themes, which equate to goals, emerge to provide structure and associations, and product roadmaps provide short-term and long-term visualization of a product. So not sure if anybody's ever seen those in their line of work, but marketing does a lot of these product marketing, and so like they have them out there for lots of things that we sell today. Okay, another term that we need to talk about is incremental delivery. Incremental delivery means that you can deliver value sooner rather than later. So there's early and there's regular incremental releases that lead to higher customer value and increased market share. It enables the customer to receive parts or elements of the product prior to the full product delivery. It allows users and the business to consume the targeted value and provide feedback to the project team. This feedback enables adjustments to the direction, priorities, and quality of the product. Conversation with stakeholders is required to find what the suitable increments are, and stakeholders receive a usable product with the expectation that additional features and revisions will come. So again, this is part of what Agile is about too. We're moving more into that from a software development perspective, is trying to deliver something of value to the customer and make it available in the marketplace before it's fully what the meets the all the requirements the stakeholders or the business had. So, like from a tax perspective, again, the usable product, usually for us, the outcome is that you have the bill that has the tax on it, and the tax is then able to be reported on, and we can know how much we bill the customer. We know how much we owe to the government or the agency that's requiring us to assess the tax. And let's see, and then we have an audit trail so that if we ever get audited by any of the 6,000 tax jurisdictions that are in the United States, we have a way to show them what we did. So let's say that the tax requirements are all those items, but all we can do in the first 3 months of development is get the tax on the bill and make sure that the language that's on that bill describes the right tax. We can't deliver any reports to tell them how much they have to pay the government. We can't deliver anything from an audit perspective because those types of things are not able to be delivered in the first 3 months. So that's what we're talking about here, is that we, as a tax team, would rather deliver the value of making sure that the customer gets charged the tax before we get any type of reporting or we can support any type of audit. Because without that, the company will be on the hook for paying that tax. So that's kind of an example of what we're talking about here, of trying to deliver value sooner than later. So while we may not give them everything they want in the first 3 months, we'll give them the items that meet the requirements to collect it from the customer and tell the customer what it is. But the other two things about knowing how much it was and, you know, what's the report that they're going to give it to us on so we know how much to pay, and also, you know, how to support it in an audit are going to come like 2 more months later. So that's incremental delivery. Okay, so we're talking about the minimum viable product now, or the MVP. And like I said, there's a lot of places where this concept is today in our company. And it is the smallest collection of features that can be included in a product for customers to consider it functional. In the lean methodologies, it can be referred to as bare bones or no frills functionality. The MVP allows all stakeholders to see and experience some form of project outcomes, a tangible output that channels target conversations, which generates feedback and ideas. And the MVP provides inspiration to the team, and it can ignite shorter-term urgency and a sense of accomplishment. So let's say that there's like a set of requirements that's out there that's going to take from start to finish 3 years to get everything done. All the requirements, there's like a list of 100 requirements, and they expect all of them to be delivered, and it'll be done in 3 years. Well, the customers are not going to be really happy with that. But if you told them, well, guess what I can do? I could do, like, give you this set of 10 features in 2 months. And then I could give you 10 more features in another 2 months, and 10 more features in another 2 months. That is probably more palatable to the customer, and then you could also incorporate, as they're starting to see this product that they asked for they can start to see, what is it looking like? Is it really what I expected? Is it doing what it's supposed to do to solve my business problems? Or, do I have something else that I want to ask for or improve upon in what they're delivering? So the minimal viable product is a very important term in all these agile methodologies that we're talking about, like Lean, so that you can get some feedback generated right away between who delivered it and who's using it, and then also it makes everybody feel better. Like it says, you're starting to get a sense of accomplishment because you're not slugging away at something for 3 years only to wait and see whether a customer really liked it or not. So then they have this other term, the minimum business increment, or the MBI. And this is the smallest amount of value that can be added to a product or service that benefits the business. So sometimes the MBI is more viable when the minimum viable product might be disruptive to the users and the business, especially when you're introducing a preliminary product to gauge interest or not. So the MBI works best when the product and the functions are understood, an incremental increase of value can be pinpointed, and the delivery of some of that value benefits the business. Advantages of an MBI are enabling project team to deliver bits of value sooner, helps the team validate whether or not improvement has been captured, and enables the team to incrementally build on that success or pivot if needed. Okay, some other concepts we talk about is cycles and time boxes. Project teams can set up release cycles and working time blocks. Time boxes are typically in the form of weeks or days for urgency's sake, and time boxes allow for better telemetry over time. As you're cycling the project through similar time boxes, you can provide progressive measurements from one time box to the next. And with time and repeated cycles, the team gains more predictable measurements that can communicate expectations of cycle times, throughput, and velocity. So these terms of cycle time, throughput, and velocity are very important in the agile world of software development. And there's some groups here in our company, specifically on the IBM side. I work a lot with them, and they develop a lot of the business solutions, billing systems, and applications, and they operate under this cycles where the release is 3 months, and what they call the working time block is 2 weeks. And they call them iterations. So there's a program increment of 3 months. They work in 2-week increments. So there could be, what does that work out to be, like 4, 5? Yeah, I can't even do math right now. I'm so sorry. That's a simple equation. Anyways, but you get the idea.
6.
Thank you. I knew I was short. So yes, so there are 6 iterations or 6 2-week time blocks in the 3 months, and the 3 months is the cycle. So, and that's also what they call a program increment. Okay. Guidelines to measuring ongoing progress. You define the value from the customer, the business, and the user's perspective, and then you determine what the value expectations are. You set the targets and the baselines based on the expectations. You determine metrics that will communicate progress towards those value expectations. You select one or more means of collecting the metric data that is not too cumbersome or time-consuming for the project team. You collect that data at a regular interval, and you present the data of the progress. Compare the progress with the baselines and expectations, and then you can improve upon the success or correct the areas where the progress is not meeting expectations. So this is very basic stuff that we do as a project manager, and you can, you know, set metrics that they, you know, a lot of the standard metrics for software development is either you're on target, you're ahead of schedule, or you're behind schedule. And then there's some other ones with red, yellow, and green. Green meaning you're on target, red meaning you're behind schedule, and the yellow means that you're working on it to get it back on track. So different ways of monitoring that. And, you know, what's good is, like, if you ask your project team for regular status. And, you know, some of the projects in our organization, they collect the data like on a weekly basis. Some people do it on a bi-weekly basis. I think it just depends on what you're working on. Also, in the Agile world, there's like Scrum Masters, which are not project managers, by the way. They're a different role and function, but you could take the daily, as a project manager, you could take the daily Scrum Masters reports and use those to collect data so that you can present that data to your to your customers or your stakeholders to show them how much your project's on track or not. And if you had set a baseline, you know, to say, oh, well, we plan to be done with this deliverable by X date and the next deliverable by Y date, then you can show them where you are with that and whether you're on track or not. So that's kind of a practical example of how to do it. Okay, so that brings us to the next activity, which you should have something about, I think, on executing a project with urgency. So a couple of things here. We talked about assess and manage risks. We've talked about executing the project with urgency that's required to deliver business value. We've talked about managing communications, engaging stakeholders, creating project artifacts, that being the risk management plan, which has your risk register, it has your risk responses, and it also could have some of your strategies for how you're going to manage your risks. It says that we talked about managing project changes, but we have not done a whole lot about that in this thing other than to monitor our project and make sure that we are meeting our goals and our baselines and, you know, raising concerns if we're not. We've also talked about attacking issues with the optimal action to achieve project success. That's part of the risk management process. And then you should also consider confirming what approach you have for knowledge transfers. People that are doing some of the work are consultants, right? And you don't want to let them go from your project at the end of it without having some sort of plan for how they're going to transfer the knowledge if there's some key learnings that they had or whatever during the execution of your project. So I have a couple questions for you. What aspects of executing the project plan have you found to be the most challenging, and why? So has anybody that's in this class been executing any parts of a project plan before? Have you written one? I'm just not sure everybody's level of experience on this in this session. Shelley, did you have something?
Yes, I'm in the middle of executing a plan. My worst problem is having to deal with resources and attitude related problems.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you have them on all projects, at least one person who is just the bane of the project existence and hates every bit about what you're doing.
Yes.
You know, you have to work with them at their pace, at their level, attempt to communicate to them with their ways. And for me, that particular resource is just a difficult resource. So it's difficult
Right.
for me.
Yeah, that is very tough when the resource doesn't want to be there or do the job or anything. But if you were able to instill urgency into them, you could tell them they could get done faster and be done with it.
I think that they purposefully hold things off so that they can hold off and charge overtime. If you want my personal opinion, and
Oh, that's awful.
I don't even have control of that person, or they're just a resource. You know how we are. Everybody's kind of on the same level.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how to mitigate it. And I've told my boss, I'm like, this is what's going on. You need to know this is what's going on. I know they can get this done faster. They're just not doing
Right.
it. So, you know,
Wow.
I can only give information and I have to tap out at the rest.
Yep, exactly. Definitely. Well, good luck to you. Does
Thanks.
anybody else have any experience with executing a project plan? Okay. Okay, so the other question is about the tools that you will use to effectively execute projects in the future. I don't know if there's anything you learned tonight with respect to risk management or some of the other guidelines for executing a project effectively. Does anybody see any opportunities there to apply any of this in your world?
I don't want to be the one that always talks, but yes, the risk management thing, had I have gotten this project sooner than while it was mid breaking, I think risk management would have been a great thing to be able to go over with the full team. Because there are a few problems that are creeping up now that I had no idea about, like in the beginning. And it's like, well,
Right.
wait, I had no clue. What do you mean this is a problem? So, you know.
I know. I feel your pain. I've been there, done that. Yes. Sometimes there's not enough full disclosure by the stakeholders, and then you start to understand things, and yeah, it's tough if you haven't done it before. And they take advantage of your naivete.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Yep. And if you live by the company's motto of "I can help you with that," which I do, and it's terrible. I love the fact that we have that motto, but it is terrible for those of us who kind of try and stay within. I don't always stay within my box of what I'm responsible for. I do like to go outside of it. But if somebody on my project says, well, I have this, then I think it's dealing with our project and not realizing that it's a whole nother project that a whole nother PM should really be taken care of. But because they're my resource and they need that portion taken care of to get my section A and B done, I always end up taking over their stuff. So try really hard not to do that.
I know. It's very hard. Some people are very good at that, you know, staying within the box. I think it's important from a scope perspective. One of the tax folks that's a sponsor of a lot of projects actually retired and is no longer part of the company, but this person would always overpromise things, and so they'd be very passionate about making sure that things got executed within some unreasonable time frames. And I would have to fight very hard to pull them back and say, look, you can't do this to the people that you expect to do this work because you're going to burn them out. And then what are you going to do? You know, because some of the processes that we use are custom. You can't just go walk into Best Buy and buy, you know, taxing software for telecommunications companies off the shelf. There's no such thing. So, you know, you have to be careful of how you treat your resources because you don't want them to burn out and you don't want to be unreasonable with them. So, you know, we butted heads a little bit because of that, and I would have to, you know, stick up for the team and try to get them more time for certain things that they just thought could be done with the click of a finger or waving the magic wand.
Yep, because, you know, they didn't have anything else to work on, but your entire team has 20 other things that they are doing on top of what you're asking them to. And it's like, look, they got 2 hours to dedicate to me.
That's right. Exactly. They're being pulled in so many directions. So, but yeah, it was a very, you know, it was very difficult to make sure that stakeholder would be more reasonable. And we finally got there. You know, it took some time, but yeah, it's tough. Okay. So I think we are at the end of our presentation. Does anybody have any other questions or comments about this? Okay. Heather, can you stop the recording, please?